Welcome to the Internet of Things equation, a podcast when I talk about the Internet of Things domain both from the technical and business perspectives. I'm Łukasz Malinowski, the Internet of Things advisor and trainer. I do my best to invite people making actual impact on the IoT domain and speak with me on this podcast. Before reaching out, I carefully check my guest's background, or at least I thought I was doing so. While inviting my today's guest, I asked if he worked with IoT product before. That was the worst type of invitation to my podcast I ever met. Yet, Marcello was kind enough to respond with a few examples of his IoT related achievements. He had all the reasons to refuse my invitation. Luckily, he agreed and he's with me today. Hello, Marcelo. I'm so glad that you decided to meet with me.
Hi, Lucas. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You made an impressive impact on the IoT domain by designing high scale, high quality products. Could you briefly summarize your track record for the audience?
Absolutely. So, I've been in technology my whole life. I really started my career doing consulting, and I did, some a few projects that, today we would consider IoT projects. However, my first step into proper IoT was in the early 2010s, where I joined a very early stage startup based out of Italy. It was called Solaire. And within the startup, we went on a journey to develop one of the very first codeless IoT platforms on the market. That led ultimately to selling the company to Microsoft in 2016. At that point, I started working at Microsoft to releasing the SaaS IoT codeless platform for Microsoft that today is well known as Azure IoT Central. After that, I've done kind of a few different roles at Microsoft and in other tech companies such as Meta, AWS, working on edge computation and edge environments. And recently, literally at the beginning of 2024, I actually joined Arduino as Chief Product Officer.
Let's go back in time. You worked as chief product officer at that startup, and 2013, that is pretty long time ago. Building an low-code industrial-grade IoT platform, that's a huge challenge. And you was responsible for product management and product strategy. So how you have you handled that once again back in 2013?
It's crazy that is so long ago. The lucky situation that we had back then is that so that was a startup that was founded with the mission and the idea of building enterprise software that would be really focused on business, on the business side of things, and really close to the needs of the business users. And so the very foundation of the startup was about being obsessed with the type of customers that we were dealing with and working our way backwards to understand what was the technology best to serve that mission, and really catering to what today we would call a citizen developer, so a business user that wants to customize the software that they're actually using. Was one of the foundational concepts when we started building our product, our platform. And really, I would say that the whole concept of the IoT platform at Solaire was this kind of codeless configuration environment that acted as the fabric, right, on top of which we actually built the IoT capabilities and then the overall IoT workflow type of capabilities. But it was really ingrained within the core technology of the company.
I believe that focusing on the end customer and providing the business value and working backwards, that is the best way to design products, right? Because otherwise you can create some fancy technology that no one wants to use at the end of the day. So think about fancy technology. After that startup, you moved to the Microsoft to continue your impact on the IoT and low-code IoT platforms. I've got a question for you. From your personal perspective, is it easier to innovate when you're at the startup or in a huge enterprise as Microsoft? Could you compare those two environments for us from the IoT product perspective?
That's a good question. I would not necessarily say that it's easier to do it in a startup or in a large tech corporation. Uh, the best answer to that is that it's just different because you have different premises. Of course, in a startup you have agility on your side. In a large tech corporation you have resources, right, that are almost virtually unlimited on your side. However, what you are optimizing, right, for in a startup or in a large tech corporation is ultimately different. In a startup, you need to build your brand, you need to build your product, you need to basically build a customer base pretty much from scratch. And so you really focus on creating your growth ramp, right? And you can focus on that. In a large tech corporation, it's all about scale, right? Because if you think that Microsoft is a company that sells every year $250 billion worth of software, right? And so, in order to matter for a company like Microsoft, the scale that you have to reach in a relatively short amount of time is massive. And so, you don't necessarily need to optimize to just get a product market fit for your product to release your MVP. Of course, yes, those are important things, but you need to make sure that you are building, the famous hockey stick effect, right? So that you create the foundation to be able to accelerate exponentially in a relatively short amount of time. So that's the main difference. And so working backwards from that, what you prioritize, starting from zero in a startup in a large tech operation is ultimately different, and the product that you're building, even though foundationally is the same, or conceptually is the same, has to difference because it basically caters to do different business strategies, go to market strategies, and customer segments.
So you mentioned many topics, and I would like to drill down into all of them. Let's start with being a startup, where you need to create your initial user base. So how can you do that? Because we've got tons of technology startups on the market. Most of them will fail, obviously. So from your perspective, from your experience, what could you advise to the startup owners that are struggling to build that initial customer base to get them off the ground?
Yeah, I think that the easy and short, simplified answer is follow the money, right? The most important thing in a startup is to really develop any technology, but that really address a business case that is real and is quantifiable, right? And funny enough, right, it's not that common, right, for early stage founders to really have that focus on really understanding where's the ROI for their customers. The challenge though is how you build your first product, your MVP, to address that, right? And over the years, I actually developed my theory, where MVP, that we all know, stands for minimum viable product, actually is stands for more than that, right? And I developed this idea of MVP cubed, where the V in MVP stands not only for viable but also for valuable, because from day one you need to really convey value to your customers, but also that V stands for validating, because with the same product you need to convey your roadmap, right, and the type of value that you will deliver in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. And so if your MVP is the combination of something that is viable, something that you can throw out the door, right, in the time frame that you set yourself, something that is valuable, generates value for customers from day one, and something that really demonstrate, right, what value you will generate and you will provide them in the long term. The combination of these three things is really, I would say, the recipe, right, for success, right, for having a successful MVP that has attraction and has an impact on your first customers.
That's why what I personalize just to my customers is do not use POC, the proof of concept, use POV, proof of value. Because as you said, the value, the business value, the money, right? That is the key indicator of if you are heading in some decent direction or you are just doing some random research that no one cares about. So I totally agree with your approach that that V in MVP stands for multiple different things. You mentioned the product roadmap, and this is something I would like to ask you because you act as a startup advisor, as board member in various different roles focused on product. And the roadmap is something that is very tightly related to the product. But even with such experience as yours, there is no way to predict future. So there is always something that you cannot predict regarding the product. That might be adoption, that might be whatever else. So how can you include that into your plan? How can you work around all of those uncertainties while working with startup of enterprise building product roadmaps?
Yeah, I believe that at the end of the day, it's all about identifying what are the trade-offs, that you need to re-embed into your roadmap, and what are the very few goals, right, top goals that you have, and optimize, right, your prioritization exercise towards those goals, and to handle the trade-offs that are top of mind for you. For example, in a early stage startup, your main goal is growth, right? So expanding your customer base, your usage, or whatever. The trade-off is between onboarding new customers versus growing existing customers. And so the combination of these two is an example of what are the foundational elements that are actually informing your prioritization effort, and determining your roadmap. Meaning that you will prioritize those features that are selling your product, and deprioritizing your features that are increasing the usage of established customers. And this is just an example, but there are many other similar things that you can do. But the important part is really start by identifying what are the ultimate goals that you need to achieve in the time frame that you are setting yourself, and then kind of identifying what are the trade-offs that you need to handle in order to achieve those goals, with the time, resources, and with the market conditions that you're dealing with.
For that, you need to have some experienced advisor as yourself, because when you're just starting, there is no way that you can even identify those trade-offs, right? And you will try to maximize every single feature of your product, and of course you will fail for obvious reasons, as you said, like the time and money are always the constraint. There is something that you mentioned, and I would like to ask you for clarification for the audience: the product market fit, because this is the term that we commonly use in the IoT space, especially speaking about products. Could you briefly describe that for the audience, and why it's such important factor?
Product market fit is everything, right? Because you need to make sure that you have the right product for the right customer for the right market conditions at the time that you're selling it, right? And so it's a multidimensional kind of matrix that you need to handle, but it's kind of fundamental for you to be able to generate a meaningful impact on the market. The challenge, though, is that when you are dealing with a market that is not well defined yet. So arguably today, right, the IoT market is kind of well known, right? We know what are the business drivers, we know what are the technological constraints, so on and so forth. But if we go back 10, 15 years ago, IoT was not as established as it was today. It was very kind of a blurry buzzword, right, with a big promise and a big predicted future ahead, but very little structure around what IoT was, what was the ROI expected to customers, and so on. So in those conditions, it becomes quite challenging to find your product market fit, because the market is not really well known. And so my advice to startups, and also the approach that I have on my day to day, is to quickly iterate, to develop hypothesis, validate as much as possible in the real world, working with customers, and then fail fast, learn from those failures, and be able to fine tune, right, your motion, so that you quickly can get to a point where you have the right product for the right market for the right time.
The validation with customers, that's crucial, right? Because customers are paying money for your product or refuse to pay. Uh, could you give us some examples of ways of validation that we can actually measure? Because if someone is telling you that they like or do not like your product, that is hard to work with that data. So can we ask customers about some features of our product in order to verify if it got the product market fit, or we need to iterate to improve that fit?
That's probably the single most important, but also the hardest thing, right? The way that I think about this problem is by thinking in terms of value chains, meaning that when you're thinking about your customers, but also when you're thinking about the partners that you're going to market with, you need to think in terms of a value chain, in the sense that you're building something, someone will use that something to accomplish, right, their goals, and there needs to be a net gain, right, for each of the actor of the value chain, in order for the whole thing, right, to sustain itself. I would say is, again, right, back to what I said at the very beginning: look for the money, follow the money, right, and try to understand what is the business outcome that your customer is expecting, largely by using your product, but also at the feature level, understand how the feature that you are, hypothesizing to bring to market is impacting the business outcome of your customers. Because at the end of the day, if there is not a business outcome, if the customer or the user doesn't have a net gain out of using that feature, out of using that product, they won't use it, right? There's no point in building that feature. And of course, it kind of starts simply from there, but then you need to kind of zoom out and really kind of understand how does my product overall, right, in its whole, generate a net gain, facilitates the business of my customers. There is a before using my product and an after using my product, right? What is the delta in terms of business outcome between the two? That's the value that you are generating, and understanding by kind of trial and error, by developing hypotheses and quickly kind of validate them. What are the features that are maximizing your customer's ability to generate that value?
You mentioned the feature set of a product, and being developer myself, I remember that at the very beginning of my journey, I tend to value features of products that I was building. So how hard it was for me to develop that feature. If that feature was harder for develop, for sure it should bring more value to the customers. But in the real life, the customers doesn't really care about the technical excellence underneath. They just need to have a stable product that offers the value they require. So as you said, the feature set is extremely important, and having the short feedback loop for the customers, that helps you to get your features right, not based on your imagination as I did like many years ago. There's one thing that you also mentioned that I would like to dive a bit deeper. So you said that it is crucial to create that win-win scenario where the customer is winning and you are winning as well. Speaking about partners, what do you think about creating the partner ecosystem when you're just starting as an IoT startup? It's hard to provide like the end-to-end value sometimes, and you need to find the right partner. What's your thought on that?
My thought is that is as hard as it is critical, right? At any stage of a startup to to really start nurturing your ecosystem. The hard part is not really about recruiting partners. It's really about finding that fit so that there is a net gain from the partner, because to join in order after joining that value chain. The way that I think about it and the way that I'm coaching my product managers or the startup that I advise is to think about partners like they were customers, right? As you develop your value proposition for your product, think about the value proposition for your customers, but also the value proposition of for your partners. What's in it for the partner to sell, to implement your product for to a third party customer, right? Why a partner should choose your product versus an alternative for their customer, right? It's really about defining the ROI that they would get, right? And it can be right because it's kind of simpler to implement, because it's faster, because it's opening up a new market for them. There are many kind of drivers, but just by making sure that you are intentional, right, in identifying the business value proposition for your partners and in general your ecosystem, and not only for that customer, is is the key to be successful in creating a healthy, self-sustaining ecosystem of partners and customers that are kind of working towards the same goal.
Thinking about your partners as customers puts you in the right perspective. Sometimes I see that companies try to abuse their partners without creating that win-win scenario. They just want to get as much as possible from the other side and close the deal. And your approach is totally different. Like, you respect your partners, you treat them as the customers, you create that win-win scenario, and that creates the foundation for the future growth. You grow together basically. So everyone wins, everyone earns money, and customer have got the best possible experience at the end of the day. For the audience, your partners are your customers. I think that is a great statement that summarizes
Absolutely.
the mindset and the maturity. So speaking about maturity, I've got a question regarding the IoT product. Let's say that you coach an IoT startup and they've got a very draft version of some kind of IoT product that it's hard to say if it got that product market fit or not. How long should that startup develop the product internally before shipping it to the customers, or maybe it should ship it as quickly as possible to get that initial validation, risking the fact that they publish something that is not well developed yet. What would you suggest?
I would break the idea of getting in front of customers and shipping your product. And so my suggestion is to get in front of customers as soon as possible, even before, way before that you have a product ready, and even before sometimes that you have a product, right? Um, an example, right? When I joined Microsoft and we were developing Azure IT Central, we started to get in front of customers before we started to write the first line of code of the product. And what we did, the way that we did was kind of, with a hack. We created wireframes demonstrating and illustrating the concept that we had for the product and for Azure IT Central. And with these wireframes, we would be able to really, present a click-through demo of, what was our vision for the product, so that we will start, getting feedback, from customers that would inform our development, vision and our development roadmap for the product. So the bottom line, right, and the one liner here is that it's never too early to get in front of customers. And the sooner you are able to get in front of customers, the better quality and better timing of feedback you get, and the better product with the best, product market fit you will be able to get to by the time that you are ready for prime time, that we are ready to ship the product. So it's really about being smart about it, and apply, some concept from the what in marketing is called growth hacking, to your product development and in development of your product vision and strategy.
I believe that is also a risk in taking that approach, that you might sell a vision that is very hard to deliver. And I'm not saying that that was the case in our example, but whenever I work with startups, I am always a bit worried that we can create beautiful vision, but I've got doubts if they can actually deliver. So do you have any like checklist that you share with startups that you're coaching, that the great vision is of course the mandatory, the perfect presentation that suits your customers is mandatory as well, but if that is too far from reality, then maybe your customers are not willing to wait for you basically.
I think that's an excellent point. And it's a risk that is always present, right? It's not just happens at the beginning of your journey, but all through the journey of developing your product. I don't think that there is a silver bullet to bring this risk to zero, but there are strategies that can help you minimize this risk, right, of overselling your vision, or being overly ambitious, right, in what you can ship over time. The strategy that in my experience proved to be the most successful is to reduce the scope of each feature, of each initiative, of each element that you're actually developing, to it the minimum possible, so that you can quickly iterate, and you can really fragment, right, your strategy. And if you will fail, you will fail with a smaller, right, piece of the puzzle, and you will minimize your chances of fail across the board. And this is the only, I would say, blanket strategy that served me well over the years. And then I think that there are other things that you can do, right? Like, for example, have a conversation not only with your business stakeholders in your customer base, but also with all the other stakeholders in your ecosystem, to get multiple ideas and be able to kind of process more information. But it's not as consistent, right? The only consistent strategy that I've used is really the fragmenting your roadmap, your strategy, so that you can not only fail fast and iterate quickly, but also you reduce the scope of the focus of each initiative that you're iterating on.
You want to avoid the overpromise and underdeliver, right? You're trying to do the opposite. So underpromise, of course, you need to promise enough for your customers to buy in to your solution, but still
Yep.
underpromising and over-delivering tends to work better. You recently became the chief product officer at Arduino. Could you share your experience from the first days at the new office?
Well, first of all, it was kind of a virtual office, right? Because of course, we have a very remote friendly environment here with a team that is heavily distributed across across the globe. Well, I think that the two combined feelings that I had the first day. One is the excitement, right, to kind of join what is an iconic brand and a company that has had so much impact in the not only in the IoT space but really in the software development space, right, with a huge developer base, but also with a lot of mind share in the developer ecosystem. The second is the sense of responsibility and opportunity. Responsibility, to be trusted, right, with the future strategy of Arduino's innovation, but also the opportunity because I believe that Arduino is uniquely positioned to really make a difference in the IoT space. In a way, the approach that Arduino brings to the ecosystem is perfect for the next phase of IoT by really enabling developers or a new generation or new generations of developers to make a difference in the space by abstracting a lot of the complexities that are underneath and really allow them right to focus on the
Mhm.
portion right where they can add value.
You mentioned that Arduino is an iconic brand, and that's totally true. And you are the chief product officer. So, do you feel the pressure? Because you've got all of that experience behind you, but still, this is pretty important position to be in. And how do you want to handle that? Do you want to use the same approach to iterate, fail fast, or you'd rather not fail and use some different strategy?
Of course, I would rather not fail, right? And more importantly, I think that the strategy that I try to to put in place is to minimize both the odds of failing, but also the scope of the failure that you can have. Of course, I feel the responsibility and I feel the pressure, right? I would be kind of crazy not to to experience that. However, what helps me there is the experience, the fact of having been around for quite a few months, which not necessarily gives me the recipe for success. However, it gives me the experience of having failed a lot of times in the past. And having learned from those failures, right? So, in other words, I don't know necessarily, right, on top of my head what is going to work. However, I know very well that a few things are not going to work because I already tried in the past and they are not working, and so I will try not to repeat that mistake, right? And so by kind of eliminating, right, all those areas, right, where I already failed, and try to quickly iterate and atomize, right, the focus on every initiative, that is, all caters right to reducing the overall risk of failure and maximizing the odds of being successful, which means being able to get to that product market fit as fast and as smoothly as possible.
It's very smart to minimize the blast radius, right? So the consequence of failure, because there is always, if you are innovating, there is always a risk that you will fail, because that otherwise you are not innovating and you are failing by not doing so at the very beginning. I really hope that you will make it as less stressful for you as possible, and because that's the experience. And what you said is very true that people tend to learn from mistakes, not from successes. Like I learned myself a lot more when I failed for various reasons, multiple times, than if I succeeded. Because if I succeeded, I think that I'm just some smart that I don't try to guide myself based on successes, unfortunately. Well, I try to do that, but it's very hard. Speaking about success and failure, what is your best advice to someone that tried to build an IoT startup and failed? Like, should they just let it go? Or maybe that first failure, this is the great foundation for the future success. What's your take on that?
Well, someone said that every failure brings you a step closer to success, and I think that that kind of applies, right, here as it applies everywhere in in business, and I think that the main opportunity that you have out of coming out of a failure is really understanding why it happened, right? Why it didn't work, and use that. To maximize your odds of being successful next time, and also kind of understand something that I see in startups, especially in the early stage one, not really considered enough, is not only the opportunity of building product to solve a business problem, but also the opportunity of doing it now, and of you doing it, right? So the three questions that I always advise my kind of founders, right, to ask themselves is, why this, why now, and why you, right? What makes you uniquely right positioned to be able to solve this problem? Why now is the right time for this problem to be solved? And of course, right, you need to foundational validate that there is that problem. If you ask right and answer right those questions, then I think that you are actually minimizing the odds. Everything else is just execution. That is fundamental, right? But it's just execution, right? And it's all about minimizing the risk. But the foundational due diligence is something that can be done just by answering these three basic questions.
Timing part is extremely important, and it's often overlooked, at least based on my experience, because people tend to think if they've got skills, they will just somehow pull it off. But if timing is not right, you can make perfect execution, and it will not fly, unfortunately.
Absolutely, and I think that to timing there are two aspects, right? One is it's really be intentional and be really systematic in trying to understand if that's the right timing, but also make sure that you buy yourself enough time to be successful, right? Because it's extremely hard, almost impossible to really nail the right timing, but you need to be, if anything, a little bit early, right? But put yourself in the condition to be able to survive long enough to get to when the timing is right.
So you need to basically have perfect time frame, not like the point in time, but you need
Exactly.
to have a budget or some kind of side income to survive the time window critical when that point will hit and you will start to gather your user base.
Exactly. It's like trying to get a bus, right? And walking, defining your timing to go to the bus stop in the middle of the winter. You don't need to optimize for getting there at the right time because you really don't know if the bus right will come at exactly the time that is supposed to. But you need to get there, well in advance. But you need to put a coat on, right, so that you won't freeze to death waiting for the bus, right? But really kind of understanding what are the conditions, right, that will maximize the window that you can be there is the single most important things in terms of timing to maximize your odds again to get the timing right.
What I often tell to my customers is that I do not know the all answers, but I'm pretty sure that I've got most of the questions right. And just the pure fact that I know the questions is a huge gain for you to commonly, to both of us, we can figure out the answers. But if you do not know the questions, as you said, like if you want to take your code with you, then you will just fail, basically. So experience plus that broad view of the IoT landscape, of the product landscape, I believe that makes you extremely well positioned to succeed as the product officer of Arduino. And I'm sure that you will nail that.
Thank you, Lucas. Knocking on wood, of course, but if anything, the determination of being successful and making Arduino successful is absolutely there.
How can our listeners follow you to stay up to date with your impact on the IoT landscape? What's the best way?
I think that the best way is LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn as a platform, and please kind of reach out. They can follow me. They can subscribe to my newsletter, and just connect with me. And that's the place where I kind of share my crazy thoughts and all the updates about my career and the work that I do both in the IT space with Arduino, but also beyond that with startups and so on.
Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today and for sharing your insights. I believe you provided tons of value for the audience and for myself, especially. So thank you very much, Marcelo, and let's stay in touch for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and let's stay in touch for the future for sure.
Thank you for listening. Go to thefingers.com to find more materials about the Internet of Things domain. My name is Łukasz Majnowski, the Internet of Things advisor and trainer.